before I actually went to bed last night, for once, for being honest.
I still wanna be in bed, not gonna lie.
Oh my gosh, yeah, no. When you go to bed at 7, it's kinda hard to sleep in past 7.
I went to bed almost at 11.
But I'm only not in bed till like 3, so.
Oh. I guess so then.
When's that due again? Oh, praise the Lord.
Somebody doesn't have their lights on.
Love that.
Somebody's just a blue screen.
Oh, yay. I haven't even started. It's okay, you know? It's fine. That's right. That's right. It's freezing here.
What's it at?
It's at 66. Oh my gosh, it's like frustration pays for one thing, you know? Where at? Oh yeah, it's that. Rolling my dice because it's. Oh, that's sick. That hurt?
Well, these, like, 3,
Oh,
that one
yeah.
hurts the most. This one I didn't.
Where'd you go?
Ink fluid.
Oh, yeah.
That's okay.
I don't know why, but for some reason they've never hurt. Okay, the one on the top of my foot hurt. That one hurt pretty bad. But it's detailed and like shaded, and it's like the whole top of my foot. But then this one didn't hurt at all on my side. This one didn't hurt at all, and then that one didn't hurt at all.
I feel like it would hurt.
No, yeah, it didn't hurt at all. Thanks. I love elephants. I love what they mean. Strength and joy. Oh, drink lots of water. And don't take ibuprofen because that's a blood thinner. Take like Advil or Aleve. Friends who went with me, they've never been in a tattoo parlor before, and it was so fun. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I'm like y'all's first. And they were literally just like staring, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys are cracking me up. Like my brother has a whole, like, it was like a 4-hour session, huge side piece. That was the first time I was there for a tattoo parlor.
So what kind of neat information you guys got to share with the world today?
I'm here on time.
You're here on time. Oh, that's wonderful.
And I'm awake. I actually got up early.
You're giving a bad example to Health Center and.
Oh no, yeah.
Where is Health Center?
No, I'm gonna be honest with you. College is hard, especially in 8 a.m.
Yeah. Right.
Oh yeah.
Crying me.
For sure.
Especially 8 a.m. on Friday.
Yeah.
Thursday night is college night at every bar.
Computer working, guys.
I'm being honest. You know.
Seeming to lag a little bit. So, today is the 10th of November. Somebody out there in Tahoka tell me what's special about the 10th of November. I said Tahoka.
I know.
Come on, Tahoka.
Come on, y'all.
What's special about the 10th of November? It's a very important day.
I don't even know.
You don't, oh my goodness,
No.
babies. It's 'cause they don't celebrate it anymore. It's stupid.
Yeah, they do.
Well,
You just have to be in the right place for them to
Exactly.
celebrate it.
the
Come on,
majority of
machine,
people
stop
don't.
playing games with me. There you go. Folks, here's your chance to redeem yourself. What's important about the 10th of November? Oh, my goodness gracious me. I don't know what happened to Health Center, they disappeared. Let me check and see. Is Hale Center off the air? I'm looking at a dark screen. It's not a shadowy screen, it's just a dark screen.
The United States Marine Corps was founded.
Okay. Say again?
The United States Marine Corps was founded.
That's right, at Tunn's Tavern on the 10th of November, 1775. Happy birthday, Marine Corps.
Do
Very
you know
good.
how old they are?
How old does that make them? Do your math.
Oh, boy.
Trying to get this computer to work while we're looking for Hale Center. Come on,
Did you go to the
computer.
Marine Ball this weekend?
Oh, really?
Did you?
No, I didn't even know there was one this weekend.
Mhm.
The Marine Detachment's gone, so I didn't know there was a ball
Mhm.
down here. Was there?
Yeah, it was, at, one of the Tech alumni buildings.
Oh, good for them.
I
It was
didn't
fun.
know there was a ball in general.
Well, I don't have my tuxedo, so I didn't.
I go to the one
Marine Ball is very
in
formal.
Reno every year. That's a fun one.
It's very formal, but, a great deal of alcohol is consumed. So good little high school students shouldn't hear about it.
Oh yeah, no, alcohol is from the devil, it is not a good
That's right.
thing.
Okay. We left off last time
The Pope
Going through-
presidency.
through, 3 presidents and getting to 1 president, and I said I was gonna start with a brand new set of slides, and there's a set of slides you have up there. I think it says Unit 8 lectures, should be at the top of the pile in your notes now. It's called the Westward Movement. We'll talk about it, we'll talk about manifest destiny and all those things. We haven't discussed manifest destiny yet in this room. So we'll get into that as soon as I can fight my way into the notes. Come on, machine, please function. So somebody got their Google out. Okay, folks, obviously you got that on Google, right? You discovered it was a Marine Corps birthday on Google? Confession is good for the, good for the spirit. Let me put something up for you. I don't know if it'll play or not. Let's see. Give it a shot. Come on, machine. I didn't offer it enough offerings this morning or something. Mr. Hunt's propaganda is about to begin. Oh, wait. I don't hear any music. There we go. It's beginning. Volume is very low. That's boot camp. Oof. Those are not happy campers. Those are Marines at Parris Island. Whoa! Or do I have a buzz from having the volume turned up so loud? Let's get that volume down. That's good. Okay, let's get to business here. We're on a set of slides called Westward Movement, if I can only get there. And you have it on your, well, strangely enough, there's Marine Corps propaganda on this too. Mr. Hunt, you get carried away. That could possibly be a test on the next exam. Test question. No, you guys can't see it? The button's pushed on this side. Oh, you can see it now. What were you?
The one test question I might get right.
Yeah, okay. So, we talked about last time Martin Van Buren. Go away. Martin Van Buren and William Henry Harrison, who lasted exactly 1 month in office, and John Tyler. Couple little footnotes to John Tyler. We talked about how he decided that he wasn't going to let Henry Clay and Dana Webster push him around, but some of the things that he did, one was he oversaw the repeal, or he signed the repeal of the Independent Treasury Act. He also vetoed the Banking Act, to the consternation of Henry Clay. And he became the first president in history to have someone override his veto. It wasn't about the Banking Act, it was about some act having to do with buying Navy ships or something like that. That kind of faded into oblivion. He also, while he was president, we had the Creole case. I don't know if I talked about that or not last time, but I might as well talk about it just briefly. The Creole was a ship, and it was leaving from Hampton Roads in Virginia to transport a cargo of slaves, something under 200 slaves, down to New Orleans. But the slaves on the way decided they didn't want to go to New Orleans, and they overwhelmed the crew of the ship. In the fight, one slave was killed and one crew member was killed, and they forced the ship to sail to the Bahamas. So far, so good. When they reached the Bahamas, roughly 170 odd slaves become free men, except for about 17 who were detained on charges of mutiny on the ship. Because you see, in 1833, Britain had gone beyond banning the international slave trade and had banned slavery in all of British territories. So as soon as they hit shore in the Bahamas, which was British territory, they were freed. And the ones that were brought to trial for mutiny on the ship, the verdict of the trial is that that was a justified action because they were being held illegally, and they were all released. One, I think, died while he was incarcerated, but the rest were released. Another thing that had been going on ever since about the last year of Andrew Jackson's presidency and all the way to Tyler's presidency was the Second Seminole War. A very interesting war in as much as for the majority of the war, that all took place down in Florida, for the majority of the war, the Seminoles won most of the battles. Eventually they were overcome by numbers and by gradual attrition and moved either out of Florida to reservations west of the Mississippi, or some of them were moved into one specific piece of land set aside for them in Florida. That lasted until about 1843. So all those things happened. A lot of famous generals got involved in that. Winfield Scott, Zachary Taylor, and some others, and we'll hear about them again and again as we go through history. And of course, oops, did I lose it? Come back. Of course, we talked about the Webster-Ashburton Treaty last time. Daniel Webster, who was the only member of John Tyler's cabinet to stay in office, concluded the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, 1842. It was a little bit difficult because we were mad at the English over the Creole incident, and so we had to settle that. But we managed to get the Webster-Ashburton Treaty concluded, and it solved some more border problems and some issues of international slave trade and that sort of thing. Okay, let's talk about this subject. Manifest destiny. You've probably heard the term before, wondered where the heck did that come from, what does it mean? It came from a newspaper man. He was pushing the idea that we should take all of what is now Texas and bring it into the Union, and we should take all of what was then called Oregon Territory, and I'll show you a picture of that later, and bring that into the Union. A lot of people were in favor of that. Some people opposed it for different reasons. There's the fellow that came up with the idea, John O'Sullivan. He was a publisher, newspaper man. He wrote, "Our manifest destiny is to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions." And he was really right about multiplying millions. In 1800, we had something over 5 million people, and by 1840 something, we had over 17.5 million people. So we were multiplying, we're getting a lot of immigrants. If you really look at what he said, our manifest destiny is to overspread the continent allotted by Providence, with a capital P, meaning he's actually talking about God, for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. What he didn't say was, who are we? Who's the we involved back in the 1840s? If you talked about, it's our destiny to do this, who are we? Who are we, the people that have the destiny? And you can be pretty cynical about it, but basically the majority, the people that ran the country, had several qualifications. Number one, they were white. Number two, they were of Anglo-Saxon origins, with the exception of a few from Holland, like Mark Van Buren. And number three, they were predominantly Protestant. In fact, I don't think they use the abbreviation much anymore, but there used to be an abbreviation called WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So that sounds a little bit racial, ever so slightly racial. Let's actually look at the makeup of this and some of the terms that we hear our own politicians, even to this very day, using because they're ignorant and they forgot to study history. First of all, the first notion in this manifest destiny is that it's God's will for us to spread across the entire continent. And I guess you could argue that's pretty valid, if you believe in God. The second is the belief that American democracy is a unique and superior civilization. And I don't think anyone can argue about that. But this develops into something we call American exceptionalism. And I do have a problem with that. American exceptionalism means that it's kind of like one of your friends coming up to you and saying, why don't you be like me and be better? Why don't you imitate me, the glowing example, and improve yourself? So we go around the world selling, be like us. And sometimes that's not accepted in a very friendly manner. If you go to China, I know we like to beat up on China just lately. If you go to China and you address people of a 4,000-year-old civilization and tell them that they ought to copy us, the 150-year-old country at the stage of the game, that sounds kind of phony. A lot of people don't understand the negative side of that. And of course, the worst part of Manifest Destiny was its racial overtones. Focusing on just one kind of people. Nevertheless, there was a national push towards going west, towards spreading our country out. A lot of it was thanks to Andrew Jackson destroying the National Bank and causing a great economic crisis, and people were out of work. Some of it was just people looking for new opportunity. Some of it was things like the gold rush out in the West and that sort of thing. But there is a really great impetus to expand. And of course, our population exploding the way it was at the time is another impetus to expand. You can look at the population chart if you want. Got that memorized? Moving right along. There's one of those glorified pictures. You can't see it, can you? There it is. I think I popped it up once before. Come on, machine. There you go. Got that memorized? Okay. Then there's a famous painting. I can't remember who did this painting, depicting the glorious Western Revolution, Westward movement. And it's pioneers, and we're all proud of our pioneers and that sort of thing. Of course, there's always a flip side to everything. There were some people that didn't like this very much, like the American Indians, like the people up in New England who needed to keep the population where they were so they could operate their factories, like maybe Mother Nature. What are we going to do to the West when we get there? There's always two sides to every story, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 sides. Southern and far west. Let's look down south first. Mexico, or the area we'll call Mexico, in the southern, southwestern part of the United States. Under the Spanish, it looked a little bit like that. And in 1810, who was president in 1810? James Madison had been president for about a year and a half. There's a big revolt led by a Mexican priest. He was a pure-blooded Spaniard, but he was born in the Americas. He started a rebellion which lasted for about a year. The Spanish authorities finally caught him and executed him. He died, but his thinking didn't die. In about 1813, another priest is going to take up the battle by organizing resistance to the Spaniards. And a long period of war is going to ensue after that. From about 1815 to 1820, it's mainly a guerrilla war. And there'll be 2 major leaders, a guy named Guadalupe Victoria and Vicente Guerrero. It gets so bad that finally, at the end of 1820, the Spanish authorities in Mexico City sent out a large military force to put down Guerrero's army. The guerrilla force was led by a criollo. That's a man that's pure-blooded Spanish, but he was born in Mexico. His name was Agustin de Iturbide, and Iturbide had a great resentment. One was, he thought he should have been promoted a long time ago. And the other resentment was, he thought he didn't get promoted because he was a criollo and he wasn't a peninsulare. Remember, peninsulares are people who are actually born in Spain. And he resented that. And the closer he got to Guerrero's army, the more he thought, I should be one of them and not one of the people from Mexico City. And so he and his entire army changed sides, joined with Guerrero and others. And they weren't saying that they disavowed the King of Spain. They just didn't like the administration in Mexico City. They didn't like the Hidalgos in Mexico City. So they decided they were going to start a new country. They'd still be loyal to the family of the King of Spain, but there would be no discrimination between peninsulares and criollos and mestizos. And they'd keep the Catholic Church where it was, in a leadership position. And in 1821, this large army enters Mexico City, and it's all over for the Spanish authorities. Mexico has its independence. Now, as I said, they weren't really thinking about democracy or anything like that. They're thinking about getting rid of the people that were ruling them at the time. So they end up forming their own empire, what they called an empire, the Mexican Empire, and they make General Iturbide the first emperor of Mexico. That's what the empire looked like. That northwesternmost area, the Californias, it was actually North and South California, Alta and Baja California. And of course included a province called Tejas. People were still dissatisfied with how the government in Mexico City was, even under Iturbide. And eventually, things will become even more complicated when a bunch of Americans and some other people that weren't Americans applied to the government in Mexico City for permission to start colonies up in Tejas. The first were the Austins, but they weren't the only. Mexico actually passed a law about doing this. Conditions for opening the colonies involve the requirement that you may not bring slaves with you, another requirement that you change to the Roman Catholic faith, another requirement that you learn to speak Spanish. The Austins didn't mind that. They were looking at the land and they didn't think that would be forever anyway. They set up their colony. 3 new colonies were set up in 1825. 1827, one of them already started misbehaving. They decided to form their own republic. But believe it or not, the other colonies like the Austin and those people put down that uprising because they didn't want to cause trouble with the Mexican government. In 1827, John Quincy Adams, this is about what, halfway through his presidency, offers to buy Texas from Mexico. It was considered. In 1829, when Andrew Jackson became president, he also offered to buy Texas from Mexico. Once again, kind of got the thumbs down from him. But at the same time, starting in the early 1830s, a lot of the provinces in Mexico, running from Yucatan Peninsula all the way up to Tejas, were all dissatisfied and had uprising against the central government, including, of course, the Texans. the way this worked out, in 1830, the government in Mexico City prohibited any more people coming into Texas, any more immigration. When Stephen Austin went down to talk with them in 1833, they put him in jail instead of talking to him. He won't be freed until about a year and a half later. Now he's changed his mind about getting along with the Mexican government. He returns home. He supports independence. He speaks out about it in 1835, and the very first battles in the war for Texas independence happened in October of 1835. And of course we know about the battles of the Alamo and the Goliad Massacre and the Battle of San Jacinto, at which General Santa Anna is totally defeated by the Texan army. And treaties are kind of choked out of Santa Anna. We had him as a prisoner. Texas or independence, and by June of 1836, the Mexican army totally pulled out across the Rio Grande River. Now the government down in Mexico City refused to recognize the treaty, even though Santa Anna was more or less the dictator when he made it. They fired him. Santa Anna is a strange history. Sometimes he's in charge, sometimes he gets fired, sometimes he's in charge again. Seems to me it's either 8 or 9 times he was in charge in Mexico. He always survived it, no one killed him. He'd have to go into exile or something like that. One time he went over to Cuba for a while, then he pops back up again. This is what the Republic of Texas claimed as its territory, that kind of seasick green color there on the slide. It sticks all the way up into what is now Colorado. In large part, it followed the Rio Grande River all the way up through what was New Mexico territory. By the way, beginning immediately after their independence, while Andrew Jackson is still President of the United States, they start sounding out the President of the United States, let us in, let us become part of the U.S. And Andrew Jackson surprises Sam Houston by saying, I don't think the time's right. And when Jackson's gone, they ask Martin Van Buren, how about letting us into the Union? And Martin Van Buren says, I don't think the time's right. Now when John Tyler, that we've talked about Tyler, when he came into office, because he didn't expect to come into office, he had been thinking about things like this, but when he came into office, he finally decided he liked the idea of Texas coming into the Union and would support it. But he didn't get much traction persuading Congress to do it. That will change eventually. Let's look out to the West Coast, California. Let's see, the Spanish got to the Americas in the 1500s. They were all over the western part of South America, all over what is now Mexico and Central America. But they really didn't go up to the west coast of what is now the United States until the mid-1700s. They decided to send explorers and set up missions. The Spanish and the French often used their priests as a way to open the door to get into other countries. The French did it, for example, in Vietnam. That's how they got their foot in the door in Vietnam. He's going to pick the governor, the Inspector General of New Spain, is going to pick a Franciscan friar named Junipero Serra, and he will lead the early expeditions. The reason they're doing this, first of all, as far as the church is concerned, they want to Christianize the large Indian populations along the coast. And they wanted to form kind of a basis of power so that they could block Russia, who was kind of sneaking down the coast. They'd gone into Oregon territory and those places looking for fur trade and that sort of thing. And they were interested in points south, as were the British, as was the government of the United States. Junipero Serra is going to set up a series of missions. along what we now call the coast of California. Back then they called it Alta California, Northern California. Eventually you found 9 missions. Altogether they will establish 21 missions, the Franciscans will. All the way from San Diego, all the way up to San Francisco. There's some of them. Let's see, on the left-hand side, the mission at San Diego, I don't think it's rebuilt. I think that's the original building today. San Juan Capistrano, I know for a fact, is not rebuilt. They've kept it in its original condition, along with the swallows that live there every year. There's songs about that, and these little birds, they make nests all along the edges of the mission. Santa Barbara has been rebuilt. Carmel Mission may have been fixed up a little bit, and so is San Luis Rey. San Luis Rey is over near where Oceanside, California is, on the backside of Camp Pendleton. Those are all of those first 9 missions. Got that memorized? Moving to the next slide quickly. There was a problem here. Remember, one of their missions, or the ideas, was they wanted to convert all the Indians in the area. Some Indians didn't want to be converted. And once they converted Indians, they were treated in what was tantamount to slavery. They didn't let them move around freely. They, one way or another, forced them to work in the growing crops and things like that for the church. Because this was not just a religious thing, but it also was a political and economic thing, Junipero Serra became a very, very powerful man. Maybe a saint already, or he may have gotten halfway to being a saint. I can't remember which pope, but one pope came to the U.S. and said they were in the process of making Junipero Serra a saint, and they thought that that would please the people in Southern California, and they found out that American Indians didn't like the idea. Now eventually, with these missions reaching out and trying to gather in all the Indians, it started causing trouble with the Indians. And the army always had to clean up the mess, and they got really resentful about this. And they finally persuaded the government down in Mexico City to tell all the Franciscan friars, you've got to leave Alta California. The mission stayed there, but the majority of the Franciscans left. And the military, the Spanish military, set up forts, they called them presidios, in San Diego, Monterey, San Francisco, Santa Barbara. And those were their power outposts up the California coast, aimed at keeping the peace where they were and also preventing other countries from expanding to the south. Most of the people of Spanish origin that lived in California around that time, in the late 1700s, lived on giant ranches. They call them estancias. And we're talking really giant, even by American standards. We're talking about 400,000 square miles for one ranch. You do the math, 400,000 times 640, and you can figure out how many acres there are. The total population, Hispanic population, somewhere in the vicinity of 8,000 people. That's a pretty big area to consider that you've covered it if you only have 8,000 people. It's the same way when Moses Austin came into Tejas. That whole region that we now call Texas had about 2,500 Europeans in it. So it's kind of difficult to say that the Spanish were really in control up there, although they also had presidios there as well. An interesting guy shows up a lot later in the 1800s. He's a Swiss man. He understands there's good soil out there in Alta California along the Sacramento River, and he asks for permission, probably had to buy permission, from Governor Juan Bautista Alvarado in 1839 to start a farm there. I guess he was going to grow things like wheat, fruit, and that sort of thing. He had a mill to grind wheat. On the 24th of January in 1848, That's closer to the time that we're actually talking about now. By the way, he called this Nuevo Helvetia, which just means New Switzerland. They discovered gold there on the 24th of January, 1848. Tried to keep it a secret, but the secret leaked. And by 1849, people are going to come flocking into that area from all over the world. Not just from the United States, from Russia, from China, from Europe. Some of them went overland, pretty long, pretty dangerous trip. A lot of them sailed there, and to sail there, you have to go around the southern tip of South America, and that was a dangerous trip as well. But they kept on pouring in. So you've got the original Hispanic population of about 8,000 people suddenly overwhelmed by 300,000 to 400,000 people. Mainly motivated by gold or business related to gold. Let's look at one other territory. We've talked about it on and off. Remember when we were talking about the border, the Anglo-American region, we said it ran along 49 degrees north to the Rocky Mountains. We said it didn't go any further than that because west of the Rockies was Oregon country. And there's Oregon country, say around 1818. You notice up in the left-hand corner, Alaska and Russia, in parentheses there. Eventually, in about in the 1840s, the Russians will agree that they don't want anything south of 54 degrees 40 minutes. But the Americans and the British are doing their very best to fill that place with people so that one side or the other side can claim it. And for a while, the British are pretty much in control. The Hudson Bay Company is going to set up an outpost there. They'll give it a different name than Hudson Bay. Timeline. Lewis and Clark, of course, had been out there in between 1804 and 1806. Then the British Northwest Company, which was just an extension of the Hudson Bay Fur Company, was going to set up an outpost in 1811. And a wealthy American by the name of John Jacob Astor is going to set up an outpost there, the Pacific Fur Company. Initially, Astor will transport all the furs and things like that by sea. You know, do most of the supplies and all that by sea. Eventually, though, they'll cut a trail that gets all the way out there. And in the 1840s, we'll start calling it the Oregon Trail. And remember, we had that big financial crash in 1837. So now there are a lot of people that are interested in traveling the Oregon Trail and settling in some of the fertile river valleys in Oregon. It says here 1824-25 is when the Russians set their southern border. They made separate treaties with the United States and England, but if you add the two treaties together, you get 54 degrees 40 minutes north. In 1846, we're not there yet, I know. During the Mexican-American War, we're going to negotiate with the British. When the British noticed what we were doing to Mexico, they decided they didn't want to spend the money or go to the trouble of getting in a war with us. So they were amenable to signing a treaty with us, dividing Oregon country up right along 49 degrees, the same as east of the Rockies. It jiggles a little bit when it gets to the ocean around Vancouver Island. And there were always arguments about which islands belong to us and which belong to British Canada. We'll talk about that much later. Oregon will become an official U.S. territory in 1848. Who went there first? Well, the first people out there were the fur people. John Jacob Astor in the middle there, he was the wealthy guy. He had the American Fur Company, the Pacific Fur Company, and the Southwest Fur Company. He was taking fur out of the Rockies and out of the Oregon Territory. Probably the first one to make $1 million was Manuel Lisa. In about 1808 or so, he set up the Missouri Fur Company. He was a trapper himself, And he was frustrated by the long trip down the Missouri River every year. It took so long and was so risky and cost a lot of money to ship his furs all the way down to New Orleans. Eventually they'll start selling the fur in St. Louis instead of New Orleans. And then he'll decide, I've got enough money, why should I go up and freeze my butt off in the mountains? I'll let someone else do it. And he organized a company and made a lot of money. William Henry Ashley was a guy that used a lot of advertising, entrepreneur, not a trapper, but he organized the Rocky Mountain Fur Company. And as indicated by the name of the company, mainly on the eastern slope of the Rockies is where he took the fur. Astoria is on this slide here is the place that John Jacob Astor set up. The Willamette Valley on this slide, some of the most fertile ground in that region was on the Willamette Valley. And gradually, after 1837, Americans that come out there, their main interests are the land, rather than fur or gold or anything of that nature. There'll be a lot of settlers, there'll be a lot of missionaries going out that way. One of the things that this guy that Ashley set up was something I'd like you to remember called the Rocky Mountain Rendezvous System. When they realized that they were losing time and money from fur trappers having to bring the furs so far to sell them, this guy offered a deal for the fur traders. He told them, all you need to do is get down to the foothills of the mountains, and I'll be there waiting with wagons, supplies, everything you need so you can stay here, and I'll transport the fur. No risk to you. I'll pay you cash. And they called it the Rocky Mountain Rendezvous System. Every year they passed the word about exactly where they were going to meet, at Bent's Fort or one of those places along the foothills on the eastern side of the Rockies. Pretty wild gatherings they were. You can imagine these guys had been living by themselves in little lean-tos and things like that up in the mountains, so they looked pretty seedy. They went down and did a lot of drinking, racing, target shooting. They hadn't talked to a human being for 6 months or so. So pretty wild setup, the Rocky Mountain Rendezvous System. Eventually, out in that area, you're going to have a number of trails set up. The main one, can you see it? Oh, you can't see it, thank you. The main one's the Oregon Trail, which is also later on part of the Mormon Trail. We'll talk about that later. And then the Oregon Trail branched off to the California Trail, which went into northern California. Those are some of the trails people followed overland. It was a long, risky trip. There's the Oregon Trail again, about 1841. Some of the missionaries and doctors, people went out there. Marcus Whitman, there's at least one university named after him. Jason Lee was a Methodist Episcopal minister. Henry Spalding was a Presbyterian preacher. They eventually will set up a government trying to get the American federal government interested in the area. President Jackson actually sends a naval officer out there to snoop around and come back and tell him what it looks like. The region was under control of both the U.S. and Great Britain at the time. They're going to call it Oregon Territory officially. And it covered all of what is now Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, and even little parts of Montana and Wyoming. The southern border was all the way down to the 42nd parallel. Remember, that's from the Adams-O'Neese line. And it went all the way up to the 49th parallel because we struck a deal with the British. In 1853, we'll subdivide it into Washington Territory and Oregon Territory. Why? Money from fur, land and opportunity, and two economic panics made people want to go west. and we were in competition with Britain and Spain for Oregon and California. Those are some of the things that pushed us up there. Okay, we're back to that election. James K. Polk, running for the Democrats. He was a dark horse candidate. They didn't pick Martin Van Buren because Martin Van Buren didn't want to let Texas into the Union. Thought it would cause trouble. Two kinds of trouble. What kinds of trouble would it cause, maybe? What two groups might get into a fight with one another over bringing Texas into the Union? First of all, logically, you could say the U.S. and Mexico, because Mexico didn't like to recognize even the independence of Texas. But who else? The free states and the slave states, because it would upset the balance. That's the whole reason Andrew Jackson didn't want them to come into the Union yet. Texas was clearly a slave state.
We lost Hale Center.
Say again? Did we just get somebody?
No, we lost Hale Center.
We lost Hale Center.
There's nobody in the classroom. They probably had like a fire drill or something.
Hello? Earth calling?
All their stuff's there, so they probably had like a fire drill or something.
What is Hale Center doing now, guys? Folks, we're gonna have to write a letter to Hale Center and ask them what they're up to. Okay, that's enough. We'll talk about the election of 1844 next time. That enough? You want some more Marine Corps music? I think I'm gonna turn it off right now. Thank you. Hale Center, what's going wrong out there? What's going on? Earth calling, Hale Center, come in, Hale Center.
Oh, wait.
They're coming back. That's all right. We're out of time, guys. They have to come back because that's where they eat lunch. Or breakfast, I guess.
Your conference is scheduled to end in 2 minutes. Your conference is now over. Goodbye.